Hey, I'm firearms attorney Gilbert Ambler, and I'm back today to talk about national reciprocity. National reciprocity is something that we talked about at the very beginning of the Trump administration, because when Trump came into office, there were whispers, and I had friends texting me, hey, are we going to get national reciprocity? What's it going to look like? This is so exciting. It's something that Trump has indicated he'd support, and it has gone virtually nowhere. That's not to say there's not been bills filed. There is a bill filed. We're going to talk about that bill today, but I want to head off the idea that national reciprocity actually moved forwards. And the reason I want to head that idea off is twofold. My office gets lots of calls from gun owners. I've been getting calls from people who think national reciprocity already passed and that they can travel with their firearms nationwide. That obviously is a concerning proposition, because I don't want to see well-intentioned folks get arrested based off rumors they read online. The second thing I've been getting calls about, and I haven't actually personally seen these, I'm afraid to even search them because it'll mess up my Google algorithm and I'll get inundated with ads for this, and I don't care to see that. But I'm having people call and say, hey, I just saw ads out there saying that if they take my class, I can carry in all 50 states. Is this a legit offer? And I'm telling them, unfortunately, not at this time. That's not a legitimate offer. We're going to dive into H.R. 38, which is the bill that has been filed. It has come out of committee, which is a good sign. I'm still not overly optimistic that it is going to become a legislative priority unless the Trump administration really leans in on this. Now, before we dive into this discussion, as always, if you have not yet hit that subscribe button, what are you waiting for? Hit subscribe, like, comment with your thoughts, and share with your friends so that way you and your friends can keep getting this important Second Amendment related content. Now, as every one of my viewers presumably knows, or I hope you know this, right now we are confined by what states you might have reciprocity with if you have a license to carry from your home state. And right now it is a messy patchwork. People go out, they get a license to carry from their home state, they get maybe a non-resident Florida or a non-resident Arizona or a non-resident Utah license, and sometimes that helps them put together a little patchwork coalition of 36, 37, 38 states maybe that they can carry in. Unfortunately, there are those resistant states that are always going to be out there and are always going to be problematic unless forced into recognizing other states' license to carry. Where I live, and I practice in Pennsylvania and Virginia, and I go back and forth through Maryland regularly. I am actually licensed to practice in Maryland as well, although I don't handle a whole lot of cases there. But the thing about going back and forth through Maryland is carrying on either a Pennsylvania or a Virginia license to carry, I would have a problem in Maryland, because Maryland does not recognize any other state's licenses to carry. Now, fortunately, after the Brune decision, Maryland opened up the license to carry process and allows non-residents to get licenses to carry. And I do, in fact, have a Maryland wear and carry, so that as I go from one office in Virginia to another office in Pennsylvania, I don't have to worry about my drive through Maryland. However, you can imagine how, especially on the East Coast, this patchwork becomes problematic, because you have a bunch of unfriendly states on the East Coast, right? You've got New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Massachusetts, etc. All of these states that don't like to recognize the licenses to carry from other states. And what that forces somebody into, especially if you were to travel frequently up and down the East Coast, and of course the West Coast has its problems as well, it forces folks into a scenario where they would have to get licenses to carry from each of these states. So they might be able to cover 35, 36 states all in one fell swoop with one license to carry, because a lot of the center of the country and a lot of the southern states are either constitutional carry or will grant reciprocity. But to go on the coast, up and down the coastlines, you wind up having to pick up an additional 10 or 12 licenses to carry, which is onerous training requirements, very expensive. I mean, the fees in the hundreds and hundreds of dollars for some of these licenses. And really, it's kind of ridiculous, because it puts people in a position where if you are driving from Pennsylvania to Maine, but you want to stop and spend the night in New York, you either can't bring a firearm with you, or you have to pay those hundreds of dollars of fees and all that training just to spend one night in New York on the way up to Maine. And I'm just using that as an example of how ridiculous this is. H.R. 38, if it were to pass, would solve this dilemma, because H.R. 38 would force recognition for one state's license or permit to carry by every other state, which would be fantastic. And I understand that there are some groups on the internet that there's some things that they don't like about the way H.R. 38 is currently written. I'll tell you, my perspective is H.R. 38, if it were to pass, would be a quantum leap over the current status quo, which is essentially you can't carry everywhere unless you happen to be current or qualified former law enforcement, of course. And again, I am totally against this sort of dual track of citizenship where law enforcement gets more privileges than civilians when it comes to what I believe is essentially a right that has been guaranteed but not granted by the Constitution. I think it is a pre-existing right to defend yourself with arms. The Constitution guarantees it but does not grant it. So I don't like the concept that law enforcement officers get more protection than civilians. I think everybody should be able to carry nationwide and protect themselves when they travel with the best tools possible. Speaking of which, H.R. 38 does a couple of important things in heading off some of the problems that we currently see under the current 926A, which is the Safe Passage Act. And the Safe Passage Act, we've done other videos on it in the past. Go scroll back through, you can find them. The Safe Passage Act allows you to travel from one place you can legally possess a firearm to another place you can legally possess the firearm, provided you meet several important qualifications. There's some problems with 926A. It's not clear what exactly is the scope of protected firearms under 926A. You're not allowed to stop and stay in a state that doesn't recognize your rights under 926A. And there's states that harass people, and even if folks are carrying under 926A, still subject those folks to arrest and prosecution. H.R. 38 seeks to, at least in part, head off many of these restrictions. So the first big one it heads off is it defines what type of weapon is covered. It covers your handgun, it covers the magazine for that handgun, and it covers the ammunition in the magazine. So this is not a super broad, it's not saying you can carry whatever you want, but it means that there's not a applicable magazine limit if H.R. 38 went into effect. So you go through a state that has a 10-round limit in their own law, be preempted by H.R. 38 if it were to go into effect. You could carry a magazine with 20 rounds loaded with hollow point ammunition inside your handgun. That would be a big win. You would have to carry a photo identification from your state of residence. You would also have to have a copy of your license or permit to carry from your state of residence with you in order to enjoy the protections of H.R. 38. But if you do this, H.R. 38 would also preempt most of the off-limit areas in the state. So the state puts up signs saying you can't carry into liquor stores. Well, unless the liquor stores are state-owned buildings, which H.R. 38 does treat separately, and that's something you should keep an eye on. But unless they're state-owned buildings, the law would be preempted. Now, H.R. 38 would still allow private property owners to ban firearms. So if a private property owner owns the liquor store and says you can't carry guns in here, then that would be an area that would still be an enforceable ban. So either private property owners or the state-owned or leased buildings, those are locations you'd still have to watch out for gun bans for. But outside of that, it would largely open up concealed carry through even unfriendly states. A final thing that I think is worth talking about when it comes to H.R. 38 is the fact that if you are prosecuted for a violation of H.R. 38, number one, presentation of your license to carry and photo identification is prima facie evidence that you are in compliance with the law as H.R. 38 is written, which means if you were to be arrested, they probably don't have probable cause as long as you had the license to carry and photo identification with you and were carrying a handgun through the state in conformance with that. Secondly, if you are arrested and prosecuted and you win, you defeat the prosecution, you would be awarded reasonable attorney fees. And this is, I can't quite overstate how important a provision this is to keep anti-gun prosecutors and anti-gun states from messing with your rights if this federal law were to pass. Because Otherwise, prosecutors who don't like firearms could simply harass folks, prosecute you, and there's an old saying, you can beat the rap but not the ride, meaning the process of being prosecuted is a penalty in and of itself. This law goes into effect, you can almost guarantee that prosecutors will think twice about prosecuting people because they know if they lose the prosecution, the state is going to be on the hook for the attorney fees. So you're probably thinking at this point, Gilbert, maybe this law doesn't sound perfect, but it sounds pretty good. It's a big help over what we currently have. What can we do to make sure something happens? And what you can do is you can call your legislators. Now, we would not only have to see the House make it a priority and take it up and pass it, but more importantly, we'd have to see the Senate, which I think that's where the real danger is. So we'd have to see the Senate take it up and pass it. My suggestion to you is if this is something you care about, and I certainly care about this, that you contact your legislators and you push them to support this bill, to move this bill forwards, and you start calling your senators and asking them what they're going to do. Start thinking about this, senators. We want you to take, if the House passes this, we want you to pass this. Now, it's going to be a heavy lift, but it would be tremendous for our ability to carry firearms nationwide, and something that I believe should be recognized, because I'll tell you what, if we don't get this done under this administration, it's probably going to have to go through the court system in order to see carry rights opened up nationwide, and that is a much more difficult and much less likely proposition. If you enjoyed this content, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Until next time.